it's Christy. I'm so excited to be back with you on the Lawnfawn YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using the brand new Porcu-Pine for You stamp set. So I've stamped those images out on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with jet black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm going to start with these adorable hedgehogs, and for their bodies I'm going to use E30, E31, and E33. I recently used these guys on a Christmas card and I used a different combination for them, so I just wanted to change things up and show a different combo that would work. So that's why I chose these E30s. I think they look really nice for the porcupine's bodies. I'm adding in some shadow first with the E33, and I like to do that on the back of the body to keep the face nice and light. So it's going to fall on the left for the porcupine that's facing right, and on the right for the porcupine that's facing left. And then I'll blend out with the E31 and use that E30 for a nice highlight on the face and belly. For the porcupine's quills, I'm going to pull out E23, E25, and E27. I really love how rich these brown tones are, and I think they're going to work really well with those E30s. So again, I'm starting with my darkest shade, the E27, and I'm laying that in the shadowed areas. For the quills, I wanted the highlight to be on the outer area. Since they're so pointy, they would be protruding up and catching some light. So I'm going to have my highlight on the edges of the spikes, which means I'm blending out the center with that E25. And then I'll fill in the rest with the E23. And as I'm coloring, I'm just making sure to scrub over the edge of the previous shade to kind of break that down and pull it into the next tone to eliminate any harsh lines, so everything looks nice and smooth. Then I'm going to use the E27 to color in their noses, and I'm just using the one shade for that since the area is so small. Then I'll move on to R81, R83, and R85, and I'm going to do the little flower that looks kind of like a tulip, starting with the R85 and blending out with the R83, and then the R81 will be the highlight. I'm also going to do both of the little butterflies in these tones. And for those, I'm putting the darkest toward the body and then the highlight at the edges of the wings where they would be the most transparent. And then I will also do my snail shell, which I know is a little bit unusual, but I just wanted to do that in a fun color. And I also wanted to have little pops of that pink throughout the card, so that was another good place. I'll use the R83 and blend out with the R81 to give my porcupine some rosy cheeks. And I colored in the insides of their ears with that R83 as well. And then I'm moving on to some more brown tones for the trees. I wanted to go very different because I didn't want the trees to look anything like my porcupines. So I went with the E40s. They're very desaturated, which I think goes nicely with the accessory images that I'm coloring. So I went with E43, E44, and E47. I'm going to do all three of the tree the same, so they are all having the same color bark. And I use the E47 on the outer edges to add a little bit of depth and shadow. And then I'm going to blend out with that E44. I'm just being very careful to only use a minimal amount of those darker colors because it can get overwhelmed very quickly on especially the thinner parts of the image like the branches. So I just try to use the very tip of my marker. I hold my marker more up and down when I'm coloring in small little areas and just using the very tip of that so I can get in all those little skinny places and make sure that I get everything filled in nicely. So I'm going to do that for both of the tall trees and then also for the bark on the tree stump. And I just love that we have new trees in a new style included with this set. So for the top of the tree stump, I wanted to go a bit lighter, so I'm going to switch to E40 and E41 for that. just a touch of the E41, and then I'll blend out with the E40, and I'll also use those two shades for the bottoms of my mushrooms, the stems. And then I'll use just a touch of the E40 in the white areas of my mushroom caps. And then for the rest of the mushroom cap, I'm going to use R35, R37, and R39. I just wanted to go with a different red. My typical go-to is a much brighter red, but I was feeling more in this kind of pinky cranberry type mood, and I thought that that went well with the kind of desaturated pinks that I had already used. So I'm using the R39 on the right hand side, blending toward the left with the R37, and then using the R35 for the highlight. I'm also going to color in that little heart duo with the same shades, and I put my shading on the right for both of those as well, on the highlight on the left. So for the leaves, I wanted to do something really different, and I'm actually going to color them in purple. We have a lot of trees near our house in our neighbors' yards that have purple leaves. They're a type of maple tree, and I did kind of look up what they are. There's several different ones, but there's the Japanese maple, and then there's one called the Crimson King, and I think there are others as well, and they have this kind of dark purple leaf to them. And I just wanted to do that. I wanted to do something different than just the typical green that you usually see in the spring or fall colors. I wanted this to be more of like a spring type scene. So I decided to go with the purples. I use V93, V95, and V99. Again, I wanted to go a little bit more desaturated. I didn't want the purples to be too bright because I thought that might look a little bit strange. So I tried to make them look as realistic as possible. So again, I started with the darkest, the V99, toward the base of each leaf, blended up with the V95, and then I started with the V93, but I quickly noticed that my V93 is really dry. So I switched to the V91, and because I'm coloring in such a small little area, I was still able to blend the V91 with the V95 really nicely. I didn't have any issues with that. So I just finished all the rest of the leaves using that shade. And then I am going to bring in some green tones, just a couple little images left. I'm going to use YG01, YG03, and YG05 for my snail's body and the leaf on my little flower. These shades will tie in nicely to the distress oxides that I'll be using for my grass in just a minute. I also threw a little of that YG01 onto my leaves just to show that they are new growth and that it's springtime, even though it's only spring on the card. In my world, it's still winter. But anyway, I'm going to trim all of these images out with their matching dies. Next, I'm going to start working on my background. I've trimmed down a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock with the largest of the small stitch rectangle stackables, and then I'm going to blend some distress oxides onto this panel using the cloudy stencil and some tumbled glass distress oxide ink. And I'm just going to blend that right off the edge. I went with this super pale shade because I think it goes well with the coloring that I've chosen. It's not like too bright or vibrant, so it doesn't compete too much with the desaturated colors that I chose to use for a lot of those images. So I'm just going to keep turning my stencil and blending that ink on, pressing down firmly as I leave the stencil and then lifting up on the pressure as I go up the panel, so I get a nice little fade, which gives it a really dreamy quality. And then once I have the third row of clouds there, I'm just going to add a little extra ink down at the bottom so that that last cloud looks like the others and isn't just stark white. I wanted to do some splatter detail on this as well, so I'm going to press some of that ink onto an acrylic block, add a little spritz of water to make it more fluid, and then I'll mix that up with a thin paintbrush and then tap that off the edge until I have little speckles all over the background, which I think just adds a nice bit of interest. And then once I'm happy with how that's looking, I'm going to set this panel aside to dry. And then I've trimmed out 2 more hills out of some Bristol. I used the grass portion of the mushroom border for the first one, and then one of the stitched hillside borders for the other. So onto the grass portion, I'm going to blend on some twisted citron distress oxide ink. And I'm pressing down pretty firmly at that top edge, trying to lay down a lot of ink because I want to get a bold bit of color there. And then I'll bring in a touch of mowed lawn down at the bottom, not too much because I wanted it to stay nice and vibrant and light. But I did add a bit of that, and then I'll go back to my twisted citron blending tool and just smooth that out. And then I'm going to switch to the rolling hill, and this time I'm going to start with the mowed lawn. And I'm not going to bother blending that out because the grass portion is going to cover up the bottom. So I'm just going to take that down toward the edge, but I can leave a space to kind of hold on to that panel for my fingers to stay out of the ink. I'm going to add some splatter detail to both of these panels using both of the shades of ink. So again, I'm just pressing those onto the acrylic block, adding some water, and then mixing it up and splattering with a thin paintbrush. The thin paintbrush is what's going to give me small size dots, which is what I was going for. Then I'm going to pop both my background piece and my front grass piece into my MISTI so that I can stamp on both of these at one time. I'm going to use VersaFine Onyx Black ink. And down at the bottom, I'm stamping Will You Be Mine onto the grass portion. And then off to the right side, I'm stamping one of the tiny little sentiments in this set. It says Happy Valentine's Day. So I just wanted to do them both at once just to save time. So I went ahead and did that. And I'm inking that up twice to make sure that I get a nice bold impression. And then I can remove this from my MISTI, both of these pieces, and set those aside to dry. In the meantime, I'm going to stamp on the inside of my card, and I'm using lawnfawn speckled eggshell cardstock and bubblegum ink, and I'm going to do the hugging porcupine couple and the little hearts again, and then the sentiment I porcupine for you, which is so sweet. I did also want to bring in some pattern paper for this card, so I'm using one of the sheets from the Stripes and Sprinkles 6x6 using this purple tone-on-tone dot, and I'm going to trim that down with the largest of the large stitch rectangle stackables, and then I can glue that to the front of my card base using the glue tube. So I'm just going to cover that card front completely. So it is a A2 standard size card, 4 1/4 tall by 5 1/2 wide. And I'm just going to make sure that the corners are all lined up nice and straight and then smooth that into place. And then I can put my focal panel together by adding in my hillside first. Just lining up the bottom 2 corners so that that little sentiment is right above the hill. And then I'll add my grassy border right on top of that. And again, just line up those bottom 2 corners. Then I'm going to add some foam tape to the back of that. I'll peel off the release papers, center that on the card front. And I did kind of take a step back to make sure it was on there nice and straight, readjust it a bit, and then press that down into place. And then I can bring in my images and start to stage my scene. So first I'm going to take those 2 trees and kind of figure out where those are going to go. And as I was doing that, I kind of smeared the little area between the Y in day and the exclamation point. So I just took a white gel pen and colored over that little smear, and that fixed it perfectly. So there's a little tip for you guys if you ever have an issue like that. It's very easy to fix as long as it's on like a white background. Thankfully it was on a white part of the cloud. So I also wanted to add this little tree stump right below that sentiment and then have the little snail sitting on top of it as if he is speaking and saying Happy Valentine's Day. So I'm just making sure to position those right below that sentiment so that it looks like it's coming from him. So I'm just gonna get those lined up nicely right below it. And then I can go ahead and settle on those trees that I was kind of using as a placeholder. I'll add some liquid glue to the back of those and tuck those in between my two grassy hills. So I ended up adding the shorter one on the right hand side and the taller one on the left. And I'm just making sure that they're tucked down far enough that I have space to add my leaves at the top. Next, I want to make sure that my porcupines are going to be lined up right over the sentiment. I wanted them to kind of be right over the first and last words, just to draw even more attention to that sentiment. And that also saved a little space in between them because I want the first porcupine to be holding the flower and kind of extending it to the second one. So I'm going to tuck that under his paw. I think that looks super cute. I really, really love these porcupines. I think they're so adorable. So I'm going to take my mushrooms next and place those down at the bottom of the trees just to add a little pop of color again on either side of that sentiment. And I'll take the little hearts and add those right above my two porcupines in love. And then I'm going to start taking my leaves and just figuring out the placement of them. So I'm going to rearrange a few times and just make sure that I have a look that I want for these. I know I stamped out quite a few of the different sizes just so I would have options, and then I could just play around with them and lay them out here and there and figure out where everything would look the best. So at first I had the larger leaves up at the top of the tree, then I switched it out for the smaller leaves at the top, trying to do different clusters and see if I like that. But in the end, I did decide that I liked the smaller leaves at the top best, and then the larger leaves down toward the bottom. I think it just added more weight to the scene to have the bigger leaves down at the bottom. So that's what I went with. I added one of the larger single leaves over on the far left of this larger tree. And then all the ones that I know that's where I want them to go, I'm just going to go ahead and commit to now and glue those down. And then I thought I was adding in more leaves, but I realized when I turned it over that I actually had a butterfly. So I just went ahead and stuck those down in the center and kind of tilted them at a little bit of an angle to make them look different because they are actually both the same image. But that just made them look a little bit different to tilt them in different ways. And then I'll continue filling in my leaves on the trees until they look nice and full. And this last little single one I'm going to add over on the left with the other larger single one to make another little cluster. And then I wanted to add a bit of glitter, as I typically do. I really love to add some Stardust stickles to my cards and add a bit of shimmer. And I love that the Stardust stickles doesn't cover up your coloring too much. It still shines through. So I did add quite a bit of it here and there. I added it to my butterflies and to my snail's shell and to the white parts of my mushrooms. I added to the hearts in the center and the leaves on the tree, the flower. I don't know if I said the flower, but I added it there as well. So there's nice little flashes of sparkle here and there that are going to really stand out when you tip the card into the light. So there, I will show you how that is looking, and I will give you another peek at the inside. I had so much fun creating with these adorable porcupines again, so I really hope that you guys enjoyed it too. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. I love to read your feedback. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have an absolutely amazing day. Bye-bye.